Stewardship and Other Traditions, a Multi-Denominational Perspective. And we're delighted that you're here with us. It's going to be a very informal, first of all, presentation by the members on the panel and questions from you all in the audience. So I'll just introduce myself briefly before I ask the panelists to introduce themselves. I'm Janet Arnett, and I've been a member of St. Peter's since 2007, and I'm active in various ministries here, including on the Stewardship Ministry team. It's been a great privilege for me to serve with that wonderful group of people, and it was also a great privilege for me in moving from Terre Haute to Chicago to run into this faith community, which I did through personal invitation of Levi Harris. He was a former student of mine at Indiana State University, and the month before I was ready to retire, he sent me an email saying that Dr. England, his favorite professor, a colleague of mine, and also a fellow parishioner of mine at St. Stephen's in Terre Haute, Dr. England told me, Michael, Jan's going to be moving to Chicago somewhere on the north side and probably looking for an Episcopal church. Why don't you invite him? I got this beautiful email from Levi. I just said it my ear with tears. It was just gorgeous. So I did, my first Sunday here was the first Sunday in October 2007. So I feel very blessed to be part of this community. So now just a minute, that's all I'm going to say for the rest of the things. That maybe ask these folks some questions. But first of all, I want them to introduce themselves and know more about their background and a little bit about their philosophy of giving. So,
I'm Debbie Harris, and the mother of Levi Harris that she just mentioned. And I have been a Christian since I was 12 years old, and have been raised Southern Baptist. My father was a deacon in the Baptist church, and my philosophy of giving is that God expects 10%. It has been drilled into my head since I was a small child, and my dad figured his tithe with a calculator. I mean, he was down to the penny. He was that type of person, and he always worked in the oil field, and he started a business when I was probably 18. And when his philosophy there was, he promised God when he started this small business of selling seeds and tomato plants out of his garage, that he would always give 10% of his income that he made back to the church, and that he would also never be open on Sunday. And that little business that started in the garage that he did on Saturdays ended up to be 6 or 7 greenhouses and a landscaping business, and that prospered and prospered and prospered. And so we have tried to follow in his footsteps. I married a person who was just a regular person, with a regular job, and then at age 40 felt God's call in his life to the ministry. So we sold our farm and everything we had and moved to seminary in North Carolina about 20 years ago. Took the kids and uprooted and moved over into North Carolina from Illinois, and it was the best thing that we ever did. But we basically had nothing but the clothes on our back and a few articles of furniture and started over. And it gives you a very different perspective if you've always had family and possessions and things, to suddenly have basically nothing but your faith and stepping out. And God has taught us wonderful things. We have gone from 2-income family, my husband and I both working, to sometimes him working and me not, and vice versa. Basically, I put him through seminary because I worked as a nurse. And through all those times, we took a beating on our house and everything else, but we looked up to heaven and said, God, you're in control. You know what we need to live. And whether we had much or little, we've always tithed, and we've never gone without. And God has just tremendously blessed us. Last couple years, I went back to school after I got all my kids educated, my husband and everybody else, and got my master's and became a nurse practitioner, and God is just blessing us in wonderful ways. I told him about 2 or 3 years ago that I felt like I'd done my part of poverty, and I was ready to, and I think God honored that prayer, went back to school. God has blessed tremendously since I've gotten out of school, got all my student loans paid, which all of you who are students know that's a huge deal, you know. But just stepped out on faith, and I feel like God is just really blessing. So I think anybody can tithe. You know, God doesn't always expect a certain amount, but I think that if you put God first, He will bless.
My name's Jennifer Denniston. I am from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I went to law school with Levi. He's obviously the common thread through our panel here. I grew up in the United Methodist Church and did not, well, I shouldn't say I grew up in the United Methodist Church. I grew up in Ohio, and when I was very young, I remember overhearing my grandmother say to my mother, and I quote, "Marcia, you need to get those girls in church." And that was the only mention of church that had ever been made in my house. And my grandmother died when I was in the 3rd or 4th grade. And after that, I decided, well, Grandma wanted me to go to church. I guess I should go to church. And so I did by myself for several years by asking my mom to drive me into town and drop me off at church. And she'd drop me off, and I'd go to Sunday school, and then I'd go to the service and sit by myself, and then she'd pick me up afterwards and bring me home. And after a couple of years, my mom started to go with me. And after a couple of years of my mom coming with me, my sister started to come with me. And that was pretty much my church upbringing. And as far as giving in the church, I'd never really had instruction, but I knew once my mom was there, or really even when she would just drop me off, she always handed me $1. And it's like, this is for the offering. And so I got the message very clear that you should always give. I had no idea how we arrived at the $1 figure, and I didn't ever give it much thought. I just knew that we should always give. And strangely, it never came out of my money. I just gave what my mother gave me to give. So I graduated from high school. I went to Catholic college in South Bend, and that was not too far off the beaten path for me. Still very liturgical church, and still no mention of giving. It just really never came up. And so I just always felt, though, even back in those days, that I had a responsibility to give to the church. And I guess I look back and I think God has worked in my life just from that early time when I overheard my grandma. He's just been trying to get his hands on me, and eventually he did it. So even in college, I had no idea why I was doing it, but I would set aside 10% of the money I made waiting tables and give it to the church. I didn't even go to church that often, but when I did, I got this envelope of money that I'd been setting aside to put in the collection plate. And again, no real thought as to why I was giving. I just felt like I should. So this is a theme in my life. I just do what I feel like God tells me to do, and then I think about it later. So I got married to my high school sweetheart, whose parents were of the Church of God tradition, the Church of God based in Anderson, Indiana. And his family goes back in the Church of God back to the very beginning, the very first day. And so I was thrust into the Church of God movement after my wedding. And it's been in that time that I've realized that I really, there's a reason that I have this compulsion to give to the church. And it isn't about the amount. It's about what I can give, what I want to give. I really do believe that everything I have is from God, and it's His. He didn't, it's not mine. The ownership didn't change. He gave it to me, and I am a steward of that, and it's my privilege really to give it back to Him so that He can use it for His work. And I realized that the pragmatic side of me always wondered, well, if it's all God's, why doesn't He just keep what He needs and give me the rest? I've always wondered that. And it's just been in the last few years that I realized that the real blessing for me is actually in the giving, in being involved in the work of the church and being involved in the different ways that we can use not just my money, but my talents and my time. Even just my prayer time can be real service to the body. And so that's where I am today. That I am currently, my bio says I'm working undercover as a stay-at-home mom. That's because I got downsized. And so we have been very faithfully giving in our family. We are now up to 6%, and we made the decision several years ago that we would give what we felt like we were able to, and then every year we would increase it 1%. And so next year we will give 7% of whatever it is that the Lord has felt that he should give us, and the year after that it'll be 8%. And I don't even have an ending goal. I figure I'm just going to increase that number 1% until he takes me home. So that's my philosophy of giving.
My name's Jerry Feil. I was raised in the Lutheran tradition, and even when we were married and had kids, we were in the Lutheran church until they were probably in grade school, and then I kind of felt the need for my kids to be in a setting that was a little more dynamic and a little more evangelical than the traditional Lutheran thing. So we started going to a community church out in Orland Park. It was kind of a reformed background, but you wouldn't really know that when you went there. And then a few years later, we found ourselves in the position to be planting a new church. So together with a bunch of other people, we planted a church in Orland Park that's now in Homer Glen, and I was a lay elder in that church for probably 14 years. Just in the last couple of years, I've kind of taken a step back from that. So that's been kind of an interesting experience, because in a community church, you know, you're there and you're kind of looking to meet the needs of a community, many of which don't have a church background, and they think that, you know, churches are out there to get my money and tell me how to live. So when you want to minister to that community, the first thing you don't tell them is that you need to tithe. You know, but by the same token, if you don't talk about giving, you're robbing them of the potential blessing of knowing God's faithfulness. So that's been kind of an interesting experience along the way, being part of that church leadership. And then from a personal standpoint, I've got a business that I started back in college like 35 years ago. So I've never really had a job. So I've never, you know, the concept of a paycheck and getting out the calculator and tithing is like kind of foreign to me in a sense. I mean, so I believe that, you know, as was mentioned, I think everything that we have is God's. And so I guess my philosophy of giving is, it already is His. You know, everything that I've got, my business is His. You know, my business belongs to God. My employees know that. And you know, one of the missions of my business is to finance the kingdom of God. Now that maybe it rubs an employee the wrong way, I guess, but you know, it may or may not. But I think they respect it. So I see that as an opportunity for ministry and all we do, you know, church, home, missions. So it's all one kind of life. I mean, Romans 12 says that, you know, we should present ourselves as a living sacrifice. You know, in response to what God's done for us, what can we do but just give our entire selves? And that includes my stuff, you know, and my business and my house and, you know, all the rest of it. So really using, you know, those gifts, whether it's time, talents, treasure, it's just, you know, kind of part of that. So I haven't, though many in our congregation, we do teach tithing, and many in our congregation do that. For me personally, my income as a business owner has been like up and down over the years. Sometimes you don't make money for a couple of years. Well, I feel like I don't want to like hurt my church just because of that. So we've been kind of more traditional givers along the way, and the income kind of works on the back end. But so anyway, that's kind of my philosophy of giving personally, is just everything belongs to God. And go from there. So.
Thank you very much. We have some questions that we want to ask the panelists to address, so we'll just start with Jerry at this time and move down this way. What is the expectation for giving in your congregation and denomination? Like, is it the tithe, 10%, 5%, something like be generous, be sacrificial? And then how do you communicate that to your parishioners and members, and how often is it communicated?
Well, generally we will teach tithe, but not in a legalistic way. I mean, kind of the concept of, you know, as Terry was mentioning earlier, do you tithe gross or do you tithe net? It's kind of always intriguing to me, especially as a business owner, because I see the other stuff beyond the gross, like the health insurance and the employer's end and stuff that's, you know, way more than you know, in any case. We teach tithing, but it's a little bit difficult. Sometimes, especially like I said, you're communicating to a congregation, and many of the people aren't even Christians. They're just kind of visiting the church because they have this kind of innate feeling that, you know, we have a family, we should maybe be going to church, go visit the church. And so when we take up a collection, we would frequently say if you're visiting here today, don't feel obligated to contribute. This is an opportunity for the regular attenders, the people that call this their church home, to support the church. And so you kind of have to communicate that way. But in terms of other ways to communicate giving, in terms of like a capital program, when we actually built the church physically, when we had to raise like $1.5 million for a down payment to actually build a building, obviously it was a huge undertaking to have a campaign, and there was lots of communication and lots of feedback and lots of organization that went into that. So in terms of expectation, yeah, it's kind of tithe, but to be honest, it's kind of soft pedal. I think in terms of other opportunities for ministry, I would say our emphasis is more on ministry and what we're doing, and the expectation to participate, for example, in hosting families. When visitors come to church, frequently the pastor will say to somebody, can you take this couple and their kids to lunch today? They're visiting, and try to make those connections. So there's a lot of opportunity. If you want, we maybe make expectations or have expectations for our members in that sense to do things that are a little bit unusual. That's it.
I feel like I have to give my disclaimer because I'm the lawyer on the panel. I don't speak for the Church of God movement, nor do I speak for the Church of the Cross. All I'm speaking for is Jennifer at this point. But the tithe number in my church, at my church home, we talk about that. We talk about the concept of the tithe and then the offering, that amount that's above the 10%. One of the things that I thought was very, very helpful in our church was our pastor, after he came to our church, it's been about 8 years ago, he challenged us to really look at how much we were giving. And he basically didn't start with that 10% number. He said, I just want you to go home and be honest and look at how much you're giving and what percentage of your income is that number. And that's where I figured out that I was really embarrassed. I was giving like 2.5% of my income. And I think that goes back to the dollar from mom. That's where that came from. And so then he challenged us, take that number and increase it just a bit. And that's, remember when I said that we're giving 6% and we're going to increase it every year, that's something he challenged our congregation to do, is increase your tithing amount, your giving amount, 1% every year until you get to the number where you want to be. And it really is made, you don't notice the 1% when you jump it up, because 1% is really manageable. And so that's what we've been doing. We do we've had several capital campaigns because our church is a really vibrant, really growing church. We average about 1,500 people on a weekend. We have 4 services every weekend. And we've planted 3 churches in the last 8 years. So our 1,500 or whatever is minus several hundred that we've sent off into other churches. So we've had these capital campaigns where we do ask people to make commitments to the campaign and say, we're trying to raise $1.5 or $2 million or whatever over the next couple of years, and give people the opportunity to commit whatever they're able to commit to that amount. And then usually what we do is break it down monthly. And you make your capital campaign gift and also your tithe gift at that point. So as a parishioner, that's something that's really been helpful to me, because I know, okay, this year I'm in 6%, and then I'm going to give $100 a month or whatever to this capital campaign, and I can kind of keep that straight. So, but the idea there, I think, still comes down to the idea of the tithing and the offering. We just don't really hammer the 10% number. I don't even remember what the other thing was I was going to say, but I know that the other thing that we also talk about a lot at our church is giving of your time and really getting involved with the work of the church. And that's something from a stewardship perspective that I know that we tend to really focus on the financial, but something that I think has been really successful in our church is giving people the opportunity, people that are like in my position where my income was decreased by 60% this year when I lost my job, more than that probably. So to give me the opportunity to still be involved and still feel like I'm contributing to the work of the church, even though I'm not able to still get that dollar figure I was used to giving, is something that I think has been really helpful, especially in this economy. And I feel like has really enriched my walk with Christ, knowing that I'm still contributing even though I don't have the financial resources that I had, a year ago.
Southern Baptists are kind of odd ducks in some ways. We have a convention of Southern Baptist churches, but each little church or big church is their own autonomous body to decide what and how they're going to do. So our church doesn't have, like no bigger church says, okay, today's the Sunday that you got to talk about tithing or something. So we talk about it in Sunday school, we talk about it in sermons and things like that, but it's not, we don't really have an emphasis on a certain time. A lot of times it will end up being the treasurer says, we don't have any money, you might ought to talk about giving to my husband. So, and as far as the amount, most people, if you look back in the Bible and everything, it will talk about the 10%. But what I have found, and we don't know as the pastor and his wife who gives what. And I think that's a good deal, because we don't need to know that, and we don't need to have our idea of our church people clouded by, well, these people give the most, they really, carry the most clout. Everybody's an individual, and each person that's baptized in the church has the same say as somebody that's been there 50 years. But we do try to emphasize tithing, but nobody really knows except for the treasurer or maybe the counters who gives what and everything. So, and we don't do pledges. So everybody just gives as God lays on their heart. And sometimes you look around and the people that are what we would say the most wealthy and more able to give, can give out of their abundance, will put $20 on the plate and think they've done God a favor. And then if we have, seriously, and somebody that may be living on unemployment or from just paycheck to paycheck with 5 kids or something like that, may give more in the year than that person who has the wealth and can give. But those people are the ones, even they're giving a small amount in comparison, that are getting the blessing for doing what God has asked them to do. But there really isn't any oversight committee or anybody that really tells us what to do, other than just the trying to teach the Bible. So I think that, and we're not talking about the
well, they've brought up some other items on our list here, so I think I'm going to jump around a minute. But the next question, which I'm not going to, because Deb started this question, so let me just finish this one asking you two, Jennifer and Jerry. Do your members make annual commitments? Do you have pledge drive, or do you just give spontaneously like Deb said they do?
No. Until I prepared for this, I had never heard of a pledge. I'm not going to even lie. I didn't know what that was. It's completely foreign to me. So no, but we do make pledges to capital campaigns or special events. And one thing that I did want to say that you triggered this, and this is what I've forgotten, is I never hear our giving of our tithes and our offerings connected to specific work of the church. So in our church, we give to God, and then the decision of what the church does, the missions that we support, is somehow that discussion is separated. So we're always, our giving, in my mind, is directed to God, and then the work of the church, we use those assets, but we never actually make that connection that we don't support the church. We don't support the Church of the Crossing. We support the work of God through the Church of the Crossing.
We have not done pledges with respect to regular annual support of the church, but when it's a capital campaign, yes. And the biggest one that we had a few years ago was when we needed to raise over $1.5 million for a down payment on a church. So that was a big effort, and there were pledge cards and so on. And we're just starting another one now with respect to a capital reduction, mortgage reduction. Put some money toward the mortgage of the church, and that's also used to, as a church, set aside a percentage of what came into other missions. And while we still do some of that, we have introduced one Sunday a month where we have an outside organization come in and kind of give a report on what they're doing and their mission. And then at that particular service, we'll take a second offering and give the congregation members an opportunity to specifically donate funds for that particular mission opportunity. So it's kind of a mix. You don't want to necessarily drive your missions by popularity, but by the same token, it's kind of a neat idea to give people a sense of participation in a particular mission that they, may believe in.
Okay, I have a question for you two, especially Jennifer and Harry. The current operating budget, what we would call, how does the treasurer know, when he doesn't know how much is going to, he or she doesn't know how much is going to be coming in each year, just running the house is not a problem. You just know that they always have enough to.
Well, yeah, it's a matter of, there is a budget that kind of makes an assumption that, based on, kind of previous year thing. But, I think many times we neglect God's participation in this thing. It's not just that the church doesn't depend on the people giving. This is God's church. If we believe everything is His, then He's going to make sure that it happens and that it's funded. And I think, too, as a congregation, it also helps you to focus on not just the budget or how much is going to come in, but are we doing what God's called us to do? Because if we're doing that, He's going to pay for it. And if we're off on a tangent doing something that's not really according to His purpose, He may not pay for it. I heard many years ago when there was a televangelist who was having difficulty raising money for his 60-story hospital. Another televangelist smartly commented, God isn't going to pay for stuff He didn't order. And so I think many times churches get off into that thing and they just expect God to follow or somehow make good on what the people have committed to do, and that's a little bit backwards.
Would you give us your comment about bald-headed white guys that you gave me?
I was just saying that, if God wants something done, a lot of times, especially televangelists, really kind of, you hear these people saying, we need to keep this ministry going. If you don't give, we're going to have to, stop this ministry. And I thought to myself, if your God can be stopped by a bald guy who's not going to give, you don't have much of a God. So, like I say, forget the other side of it.
I thought that was a really cool faith statement. I thought that was like, oh, he is right about that. And then I mentioned, I don't know if any of you read J.B. Phillips' book, Your God is Too Small. So thank you, Jared, for that. Did you want to say something about this last? I was going to move into time and talent next. Is that okay, or you want to say about mission?
I'll just really blow you away. We don't have a budget. Yeah, we don't have a budget.
What do you argue about?
Well, we have planning. We have budgeting things, but we are a very small church. Maybe between 50 on a given Sunday, 100 would be just loads. We have no budget. The only thing that we do have specified is that, we are in a rural southeastern Illinois town. Poverty level is very high. Most of the people, a lot of the people that come to our church are not coming for what they can give, it's what they can get back because they have financial needs. So we always have people standing at the door wanting us to pay their electric bill or needing food or needing gas to get to the next town or something. So we have no budget, but we do have designated that 10% of what our church gets goes to what we call the cooperative program, Southern Baptist Cooperative Program, and that supports our foreign missions, state missions in the United States, Baptist hospitals, Baptist seminaries, Southern Baptist relief efforts, and things like that. So 10% goes to that. Then we have 2% of what comes in goes to our local association, 9 churches, in church camp and things like that they do. So 12% of what we get goes to that. And I'll totally blow you away. We have no savings account. So you know, so we have no budget except for the 12% of what we get is going out. So then we have, do the math, 88% of what comes in to keep the church afloat, pay the preacher, keep the utilities paid. And then we are always giving to other people. So it's totally by faith.
One of you mentioned, or I think a couple of you did, how does your church treat offerings of time and talent? And I think you, Jennifer, mentioned that as giving. How do you encourage that? Do you talk about that as a church?
I thought this was, I think this is kind of a strange question because you don't get credit for how much you give. You know, it's not like the United Way is having a drive and there's the thermometer on the wall that says Jennifer gave this much. So I will say that it all really comes back to the fact that you give ideally because you love God. You know, because you're just all in. That's how I think, that's how I feel about it. And when I say that, everything I have is God's, that's not just because I read it one day in the scripture. It's because truly, this is the opportunity for me to be here today, that's His, that He gave me the opportunity to be here. He gave me the 3 hours of uninterrupted quiet in the car that I never get. He gave me the opportunity to see good friends I haven't seen in years. This is a gift from Him to me, and I have the privilege of using it for His glory. Everything I think is like that. So you don't give because you want to give, you give because you love the Lord. And I think that comes, the opportunity to use your time and your talents for God it's probably the biggest way that you can honor Him because He gave you specific gifts. We talk about this concept of spiritual gifts, and there are all kinds of tests you can take to figure out what yours are, but you know what you're gifted in, and you know how God can use you. And it's amazing when you look around how one day someone walks up, me, a year and a half ago, walked up to me and said, "We need someone to work with the senior high girls, sophomores." And I was like, "Are you serious? You want me to do what?" But I didn't have anything going on Wednesday nights, and I prayed about it, and I thought, okay, I guess I'm supposed to go do this. And in the last year and a half, it's become really apparent that I was the person that needed to be there for all kinds of reasons. I could take an hour to tell you why. But He needed me there, and I probably spent 3 hours a week on those girls. It's kind of like herding cats. That's what I tell people. I spend a lot of my time for God herding these girls, in their lives, but that's what He's called me to do. And it doesn't cost me a dime, but I think I'm making a huge impact for the kingdom in that way. And it's a way that, it's never going to get chalked up on my thermometer because it doesn't increase my percentage, but I think that's something that only Jennifer could give. Jerry could give $20, I could give $20, Deb could give $20. $20 is $20. Only Jennifer could have been there when those girls needed it to fill that gap. So that's why it's not something that the church really talks about, but when you really commit yourself to Christ and when you're really kind of in there, it just happens. And it's so exciting, but now you can't keep me away from volunteering for things because I can't, and talking about it apparently, because I just get so excited for what God is doing in my life for other people that I would sleep there if I could, and I just want to do that all the time.
Yeah, it's really, if you get people excited about the mission and what you're doing, the time and the talents and the money comes through eventually. It's like, when we built the church way bigger than we needed for our, group of 100 people. We're building a church that seats 500. So, how do you finance that? You don't convince people to tithe because if you really think about it, you're going to need to probably have those people giving 50%. The way you finance it is you grow. And you expect that if you're doing what God called you to do, you're going to need to grow that church. You're going to need to bring in people from that community and develop relationships and do all the things that God wants us to do. And somebody might be able to, give $100,000, and somebody might be able to, smile and greet somebody. They say that within the first 30 seconds of somebody walking into a church they're visiting, they've already decided whether they're going to come back or not. Basically, the nonverbal things. And if people are aware of that and they're part of the mission. They don't need to be wealthy. They don't need to go to a seminary. They just need to know how to smile and be friends with someone, and they can be part of that mission. So if you do that, and even like house groups, that's really another strong thing. You get people involved in that kind of stuff, and they get drawn into it once they see the big picture of what God's doing. And once that gets reinforced by the changes that God works in people's lives, the cycle continues.
Our theme here is God's abundance, transforming abundance. And Jerry, I'd like you to tell the group a little bit about your $1.5 million capital campaign, how you all started that, and any tips you might have for those of us interested in capital campaigns.
Well, it's really it started with the feeling that, hey, we felt that God was calling us to build a church, and you kind of test the spirits. Is this just something we want to do or not, or is God really calling? And so the pieces, kind of obviously you pray about it and you kind of seek God's wisdom, and the pieces started to fall in place. There was a gentleman who 15 years ago had bought a piece of land, 12 acres of land out on, if you're familiar with the area, out on 159th Street near where 355 is at, and just felt that ought to be a church someday. This was a businessman, and he held that land for all those years, and ended up he donated that land, so that was one big component that came into place. And in terms of the capital campaign, we did actually even hire a consultant to help us with that. I'm not sure if that was really a wise decision, but the biggest advice the consultant gave us was to get people involved, not just in the mission, but in the actual capital campaign. So in the campaign itself, we had so many things going on and so many events, and there's probably, I think they said 65% of our congregation was like part of the stewardship campaign, not just the givers, they were part of the actual organization. And so the involvement was there, and it happened. God provided, I guess, is the answer to the question. I mean, it was a challenge, and then now it's the building is there, and obviously the challenge continues as they need to grow and finance it and pay for it and all that good stuff. But it's the feeling for me was when we did personally, being part of a church when we did the groundbreaking, being in the middle of this cornfield and sticking a shovel in the ground, and just thinking, this is totally not what I'm into, and thinking that long after I'm dead and gone, when I'm not part of this equation at all, people will come to know Christ in this place, and that for me was just a mind-blowing.
Jennifer, did you want to say something about the missions? We were talking a bunch about all the missions that the Church of God.
Well, my congregation tends to be really missions-oriented because our senior pastor came to be our senior pastor after returning from 8 years in Kenya, running a school of theology in Kenya. And so we have always been relatively missions-oriented, but now we're really missions-oriented. And we give 16% this year of our budget off the top to missions. Next year, it's the same plan that I've got at home. It's 17% next year, and the goal is eventually to be 50-50. The 50 cents of every dollar we bring in goes to missions, and 50 cents stays with us in Indianapolis. We break our missions down by, we have local, state, national, and international missions. And so every year we tend to pick kind of a focus in each one of those slots. And so we support an inner city Church of God in Indianapolis, and we are their only provider for their food pantry. That doesn't come out of the church's budget. There is literally a closet in our narthex where people walk in. I have 5 bags of groceries I'm taking on Sunday, tomorrow, to put in this closet, and then someone comes and picks them up and takes them downtown. We support a Church of God camp in Indiana. We support the Church of God camp in Alaska and have sent work camps up there several times. And also we support several churches, but mostly our big focus this year is an orphanage in India for girls. And also there's a church in Sao Paulo, Brazil that we actually are building, not just with money, but we've sent teams. We spent 40 days building in Brazil at the beginning of this year. We staggered teams. So the Church of the Crossing was there in Sao Paulo for 40 days building. So, and their new sanctuary will be done by next summer as a result of that. So that's just a big focus for us. And like I said, it's just kind of expected now that, you know, when we have a capital campaign, we are now undertaking a capital campaign to build a community center on our campus. And I forget how many $1 million it is to build it, but 17% of what we raise goes to missions. And so even our capital campaigns, we give, you know, that percentage to missions off of our capital campaign and also our budget. So, and usually the last time we did a capital campaign, we picked, and I don't even remember now what it was, I think it was a church in Tokyo, but they were having a building campaign, and our 15%, so it was 15% that year, went to their building campaign. So that's how we do it.
Missions. I thought it was interesting the way they break it down. They do have it local and very, very specific. You have local, state, and international, and national. Okay, let's ask, are there any questions from you all out there? Does it, Jay?
This is a very technical question about something that Debbie said reminded me. And I'm just wondering what the general thought is. And that's the question of whether the pastor or the rector or whatever title he has should know the pledge. I know among Episcopal priests it's about 50-50. We've been told by some consultants technically they should. I know some priests that think that. I know others that said they don't want to know. And I just wondered what your thoughts were anyway. What is the better way to go on that?
Yeah. Did you all hear the question? Deb, back there, did you hear the question? Deb brought up the fact that her husband, as preacher, does not know, and Deb doesn't, who gives what. And Jay's question was asking us to talk more about that. Is that a good idea, a bad idea? And he mentions that in the Episcopal Church about 50-50, and it seems to be up to the rector and the vestry. Do they want the rector to know who gives what? Do we think that's an important part of their knowing their pastoral mission with the people or not? So Deb, you brought that up. You can start.
We don't want to know because it's kind of like it goes back to the Bible verses that talk about if somebody wealthy comes into your congregation and they're welcomed in and seated in the finest place and et cetera, and then somebody comes in that's in ragged clothes and, you know, well, we'll say, here, sit in the back and don't bother anybody. You know, we don't want to have our ability to minister to people based on what they give to the church, you know. And it also says something about a Bible verse, and I can't quote what it is, you know, when you're doing your giving, don't let the right hand know what the left hand is doing, you know. So we're not giving to be seen or to gain status or whatever. We just, and the treasurer will say, well, Brother Brad, you better be preaching on tithing because we're getting a little low this month, you know. And we have another thing that we do at different times. We will have spontaneous testimonies of people in the church, and people will stand up and say, you know, we always tithe, and, you know, we had a need and God met it miraculously, you know, some way, or, you know, so that people can learn that, you know, and hear from other people that are committed tithers that God is good and He's not going to leave them penniless. So we don't want to know, and it's almost becomes, if we know who gives what, it can be kind of mercenary about, well, you know, well, look at them, they could be giving a lot more, you know, and you will have that, you know. And so we just kind of leave it in God's hands, pray about it, and people decide what they're going to give. They think it's their money, and I will give you a little quote that some preachers I've heard said, you know, we've all said as a panel, everything's God's, and He gives us what we have. And it's the old adage, you know, that the preacher stands up and he says, I'm happy to report that 100% of the people in my congregation are tithers. You know, and I'm like, whoa, that's really good. Said half of them give it spontaneously, and the other half, God has to go get it from them, that He will get it one way or the other.
want to talk about the openness of?
I would agree that it's, in terms of the ministry, the pastor or elders who are there to minister to the spiritual needs, how the best that they don't know. We actually have a CPA, a woman who's a CPA who's not a member of our congregation, who handles the books. Now, obviously, the pastor or some elders, if there's a situation where somebody makes a significant contribution, they're gonna know about it. But even then, on the other side of the coin, when on a benevolent standpoint, people need money or they need help. We have in our church, we've got an elder board that's primarily responsible for the, I guess you could say, the spiritual running of the church, and then a deacon board that supports the tangible, running of the place. And benevolence comes under that area. So if somebody has a financial need or needs, a mortgage payment made or whatever, they'll be directed to go to the deacon. So we don't even, the elders and the pastor don't even necessarily want to know who the church is financially helping, because we don't want that to interfere with how they may be, how we may be perceived from a spiritual standpoint. We have had this, last year there was an occasion, interestingly enough, where there was a family that we were helping for several months, making their mortgage payment, and after they came through this experience, and nobody knew, except for a handful of people who that was. But after they came through this experience, they asked to be able to give a testimony, and the husband got up there in front of the congregation to thank the congregation for the financial help that he had received, and kind of obviously a tough thing to do, but it was really kind of a powerful testimony of God's faithfulness.
Just real quickly, from the bigger church perspective, I don't think it would be feasible in our church for our pastor to know all of those details and kind of keep track of that, because, like I said, I don't even know how many giving units we have, but I know attendance, what I say, 1,400, I don't even remember because it fluctuates a lot, but I just don't think it's really feasible, and I feel like we do break that down. The money people they're all members of our congregation, and our board of elders are they're the money people on one side, and then the pastors on the other side. And as a parishioner, I would prefer that not, for example, my pastors, for whatever reason, didn't know that I got laid off from my job for several months. It just never came up in conversation. I didn't feel the need to tell them. But my giving fell off because, a percentage of what I was making before is a lot more than what I'm making now. So I would not have liked the fact that I would have felt like I had to go explain myself why I'm not giving as much to my pastor. If they had access to that information, as it is, it just never dawned on me.
It's interesting because I think it was Walter Brueggemann, and maybe Terry Parsons even quoted him, money being an issue around which we have spiritual growth opportunities. Particularly most of us, and I'll speak for myself, have this scarcity mode that's been pounded into us by our grandparents and parents. There's never enough, and I think part of our spiritual growth is to break out of that and to recognize that God is abundance. And I think sometimes our reluctance to talk about money, it's just it's just like Jan broke her arm, Jan lost her job. I don't know if it's a pastoral thing that we could be talking about here. And then I think you have to, I don't know what the answer is, but it's a good question. Jay, did that answer your question? Or?
It does, and I guess I'm not sure how good a sampling this is, but I'm a little surprised how many, almost all of you said that your rectors or priests or pastors don't know what to give. I would have thought of it the other way around. I find that very good.
Yeah, because we have talked about this at St. Peter's in terms of our own spiritual growth as individuals, and in this, particularly in this climate, we do suffer from money deprivation, the sense of it anyway. And so, is that a pastoral need or not? I saw another hand up on this side. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
a question. I guess it's directed towards Jerry. Could you brought up about at what point do you ask a person to make a financial contribution or participate in the
and I really appreciate Terry's hierarchy of needs thing this morning, because I think it models, especially a community church where you have people coming in who really haven't been to church for 20 years and they're being assimilated. So I see that progression that she illustrated this morning as an accurate one. And I think, but I think you can ask for the time and talents commitment, in small ways immediately, and then the money thing, you would hope just kind of goes along with it. But the other thing is, in terms of like membership, we as a church don't really play up membership. In other words, being on the roster of the church as a member as a big thing. Obviously we don't want to confuse people with salvation versus membership or anything else, but we basically say, membership is, you're a shareholder, you're buying into the community, you're buying into the enterprise, if you will, of this church, and as a member, you're responsible for, you agree with the mission of the church and that you buy into that, and at that point, we stress the time, talents, treasure thing, though not as we do talk about the tithe, but like I say, it's not a hard-hitting thing. But especially, this is kind of one of the things that has been pointed out as kind of a fault of the so-called community churches is it's kind of church light. There's usually clapping, and you don't have to go Wednesday night and Sunday night, and you're not hit over the head to tithe and all that stuff. And so when Christians come into this church, you can kind of understand people from the community who have been to church, and that's a kind of attractive thing. They're going to come into a community church. But if somebody's been a Baptist, or they've got a strong church tradition, and all of a sudden they show up at your door in a community church, we kind of look at them suspiciously. Okay, like, why are you here exactly? Is it because you're burned out of your church and you just want church light, where you can sit there in casual clothes and clap your hands on a Sunday morning and not be forced to give? So that's one of the challenges that you have, and we say, to people, if you're coming into a congregation like ours and you are a Christian, you need to look at why are you here? Why are you coming to this church? And what is God's role for you here? And we can't necessarily answer that for you, but obviously it goes into the whole time, talents, treasure thing.
Speaking of time, talents, and treasure, how does your church acknowledge or thank parishioners for giving either of time, talent, and treasure? Do you send notes? Does somebody send them? Do you ever get a thank you note for the time you put in with those young women at the... No, I mean, does your church rate? Terry pointed that out this morning about how important it is to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I've been really pushing for thank you notes on that committee because I think it would mean a lot, but that goes against our theory that nobody knows how much anybody gives, so I'm kind of hitting a wall on that one. But as far as giving, that's one thing our pastoral staff, and again, it's the kind of church we have 9 full-time pastors on staff at our church. So they all have their own individual ministry areas, and they really do oversee that, the thank you aspect. And so when we did our youth, they do a big show in the spring to raise money for their mission trips in the summer, and I volunteered for that. One day, I showed up one day, which really didn't seem like very much for me, but I got a handwritten thank you note from the youth pastor when it was all done for that. And and they really do, they talk about that with the kids, because I can speak to the youth ministry because that's where I'm most involved, but we talk about that with the kids. And I have a tendency to say to my girls, if Pastor Brett was really helpful to you, you really should say thank you to him, because it's important to encourage other believers, and we try to impress that upon them. And just this week, lo and behold, I got a Facebook message from one of my girls that just said, thank you for being my small group leader. I cried when I read it, because it came right at the right time. It was the hardest day. I was sitting in the hospital with my father-in-law, and I get this message from this girl, and it was the sweetest thing. So that we talk about thanking people and being thankful for the time that people put into the ministry. So that I think it just kind of happens organically when you talk about it.
It's important, though, that we consciously remember to do it. Jerry, do you have anything you want to say to this before I turn it in? Okay, I want to ask Deb. First of all, I want to commend Deb, because I'll tell you, I've never seen anybody in this world who was more eager to write thank you notes than Levi Harris. So Deb, whatever you did to raise that son, to be so grateful, I don't know, but we all appreciate it. How does your church thank the people that you don't know who gives?
We don't. We don't thank them. We just, you know, we have like a generic thank you for you know, what you did, or, you know, thank you for all those that helped at Bible school, or those who went and did this or that mission. But a lot of times we don't list people out, because if we do, invariably we'll leave one out, and then there's hard feelings. So, you know, we will, you know, do generic thank yous like that. Or sometimes Brad will just, in a sermon, say, you know, if someone has really touched you, you know, in this church, you know, go to them and say thank you. You know, I mean, during the closing minutes of the service and everything, and those have been really moving services, and it may have been somebody that did something that you didn't think that was important at all, you know, but it meant something to them. So, but as far as thanking people for giving, since we don't know, you know, who gave what, we don't do that. You know, we will acknowledge we have missions giving, and we have other things that we do, and we'll say how much we raise and what it's going to be used for, but as far as individuals, no.
Anything else on thank you? Okay, thank you. How does your giving, all three of you are married, I guess, and how does that affect your relationship with your spouse? How does it affect your relationship with the church, your relationship with God? How does giving enhance or detract from those relationships?
I would be in big trouble if I didn't give. Preacher's wife can't get away with too much. But, you know, it's just something that we have always done. Now, my mother just passed in the last month, and all of a sudden I have an inheritance, and we've lived without a lot of things, you know. And the other day, it just dawned on me, you know, I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do with all this, you know? And so I'm in a mode of praying and saying, you know, for so long we've only had so much that we could give, you know. And then I'm thinking, how much tithe would there be on that much, you know, and stuff, and what could we do with that? So I'm just in the praying mode of, you know, what to give, not necessarily how much, but in what ministries, and praying that God will direct me, you know, to use what we have to what He wants us to do with, you know. But as far as in our family, it's not do we give, you know, it's just not even up for debate. It's just where and how.
I think it's been as far as my relationship with my husband, it's been really something that's helped bring us closer, I think, because it's one of those things that we really have prayed about. And we choose of our tithe money that, you know, we support certain ministries outside our church as well as inside our church. And so and that's a personal choice, again, disclaimer, it's not the church's teaching necessarily, but it's something that we've chosen to do. And so we feel like we have, you know, we sponsor a child in Haiti, we support a missionary couple together, and that's something that it's the same way that it makes us feel engaged in our church when we give to the church. I think it makes us feel engaged with one another because we're giving together. As far as my experience how does it affect my relationship with the church? Was that the other question? Like I said, I don't give because I am not a Christian because I give. You know, I give because I'm a follower of Jesus. And because I worship in a place that I believe God has called me to. So it's not really, I think I'm giving because I already have that experience, if that makes sense. So if I felt like I was in a place where God didn't want me to be, I think I would move and go where He wanted me to be, and that would take the giving with me, I guess. So
In terms of my relationship with my wife, she's probably a more generous person than I am, so we don't have a problem there. The other kind of thing that's interesting is for many years my wife and I worked together in our business, and so we kind of see that as almost mission-like, kind of working together too, and that's been kind of interesting. And just being able to minister to employees who are having difficulties and that kind of thing. One of the things that my wife had the idea she came up with some years ago that we still do is near Christmas time we have a thing with our employees, and we've got like 22 employees or so, where they can make a contribution to a charity or church of their choice, and we'll match it as a company. And just, to a certain financial limit, of course, but it kind of just helps spread that generosity and encourage them to be generous to their church or whatever kind of an organization they want to give to, whether it's a Christian organization or not. But it kind of fosters that culture, I guess you could say, of giving more than you get. And is that what Christ modeled for us? He gave his life. He gave more than he got, right? And so you want to be successful in business, you give more to your customers than they give you. You give more to your employees than the work that they give you, and that's kind of the abundance model.
Wow, I'm amazed at that matching of gifts for church or charity that your employees. That's a wonderful thing. How many corporations, companies do that? I think that's a wonderful model of giving, and I know you talk about that giving God is not just in church. I mean,
Yeah, today, to be a manager or a business owner, today there's so many people that are so screwed up. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Their home situations are so fragile, and so that part of our business, in a sense, is kind of mentoring and leading and dealing with kind of being almost like a father figure for some people. Sometimes is it's challenging, but it's an opportunity as well. And that's why I say when it's God's business, you turn it over to him, and he's going to bring people there who maybe not just need a job, but need help or need a stable person in their life.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience? Yes.
I'm going to try to spit this out. Here we go. Back at the three of you, you're saying that the church is always focused on high. And there being the opportunity to grow, and the answer to that is yes. Have those opportunities, and eventually turn into high interest support for something. So you really more focused on what the gifts that people have to give, whether it be tithing or parent, whatever that may be, and does that eventually turn into this financial support of churches?
Yeah, I think ultimately, when you say does it allow you to expand, I assume you're kind of meaning financially, right? Grow. I mean, it is not asking for the 10%, get you the money in the long.
Well, I
kind of
mission
right.
To really help to grow the path that the churches are.
Well, they do teach tithing, but it's just not drilled home in a real kind of legalistic way. But I think the bigger picture, like I said, is the mission. If you can get people excited about the mission and what the church is doing, and obviously you need to make sure the church is doing the right thing in order to accomplish that, then then that's really humbling. I mean, then you begin to ask yourself, okay, this thing is way bigger than me or my 10%. Like I say, when you're standing there looking at the shovel in the ground, it really has nothing to do with me and land. It has to do with God's move. And my lousy 10% is a little part of that. So it becomes, the focus goes off of the 10% and onto what God's doing and how can I be a part of it.
Starting with that mission.
Yeah, when people see that, exactly, in terms of I think a testimony of somebody sitting up in front of the congregation and talking about how they tested the waters, God says, prove me, give and it'll be given unto you. And they tried it out and God was faithful. I think that kind of testimony is almost more effective than, a tithing sermon.
I think that in response to your question, yes. My answer is yes. We don't drill the 10% number number, and yes, I think it's enabled us to give, but I think the reason is that tithing is such a Christian principle. It's very scriptural. And like Debbie said, it's in there written down. And when you talk about being evangelical in your mission, you're dealing with, just by definition, non-Christian people. So it's almost like if you drill tithing on the first Sunday that a non-Christian shows up at your church, it's like taking me to Italy and saying you have to speak fluent Italian to stay. That's not fair. I don't know Italian. I don't speak that language. And so tithing is just one of those kind of loaded Christian. It's a Christianism that a lot of people that come into the church really aren't comfortable with. And so yes, I mean, we talk about giving, and our church actually, we talk about finances all over the place. We're really that financial peace university, and Dave Ramsey and all those things. Our church does all of that. Our church is debt-free, and we had a big party when the church got debt-free. Our last capital campaign was to get debt-free. We talk about those things. Yeah, woohoo! It was big. I'm looking forward to my own party, but I. It will be, yeah. In the present climate, I'm looking forward to also feeding my kid next month. But how it happens. But I think that's the key for me, is that if I would have come into the church and someone really started pounding that 10% number for me, I wouldn't get it. And that's when, for me, in my tradition and where I am, my relationship with Jesus is not about rigid rules. It's about He died for my sins and He's saving me, and now I will go to the ends of the earth to follow Him because of that, because I'm grateful and because I love Him. And once I got there, I'll give, and then you can tell me 10%, I'm probably going to want to give more, because that's what happens. But I think you really, from my perspective, you've got to do Jesus first, and then you've got to do mine.
This is from the Bible, Malachi 3:8 here. And it says, "Will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithes and contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you." And here's the good part, "Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you, and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need." And I think that, in our lives as Christians, we have always tried to tithe. Like I said, we have never gone hungry, but, God has just blessed us and blessed our socks off, and it may not be necessarily in financial ways, but I look back, and I'm in the years of my life now that I'm looking back and, trying to figure out, instead of what am I going to do when I grow up, which I'm still kind of in that, but looking back and saying, we have not had a lot of financial wealth in the past, but I have two wonderful children. I have Levi, who's a lawyer, and Laura, who's a school psychologist. They're both Christians. They're both active in their churches. And God has blessed us in financial ways, but He has also blessed us in other ways. And just being able to, like going from being a nurse to a nurse practitioner, now I feel like I'm able to help people better. And God has blessed me so that I can bless others. And that goes with time, talents, and with our financial contributions also. But it's all, Baptists kind of preach, if the hearts of men are right with God, their pocketbooks are going to follow. If people are getting to the point where they have a relationship with Jesus and He's in their heart, they are going to give as God leads them to give.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Was there a question?
Yeah. I have a question about people who are new to the church or who didn't grow up with families who taught them about giving, sort of like different. But how do you, as a church, begin to start that conversation and teach them how to give and what it means? Do you do that at your church?
Yes. I will say that our teaching is, well, when you have that many people, you just don't have the luxury of flying by the seat of your pants. Because you just kind of have to, everybody's got to be on board and going the same direction, or you're going to have chaos. And so I think the giving messages are really sprinkled throughout the year. We don't have a tithing Sunday. We do have one, we call them weekends because we have Saturday services, but we have a vision weekend where we go through the budget for the next year, we talk about the missions we're going to support, we do all of those things and kind of bring that to the church. But the biggest thing the biggest thing that we do to address giving is really to address thankfulness, I think. And this year, for example, our entire church is following a book. It's called The Story. Zondervan published it if you want to look it up. But it's basically the Bible reduced to novel form. So all the really good stories have their own chapter. And we're just marching through the Bible front to back this year. And through that, that's one of those themes that gets pulled out is, God providing, or when people give, how he's provided back to them. So I don't want to make it sound oversimplified, but I still really stand by the fact that if you're reaching people where they are for Christ, then that idea of giving will come. I think it's almost human. I mean, if someone does something nice for you, you don't have to be a Christian to want to return the favor. I mean, that's where we got that phrase of return the favor. And I think on a very basic level, that's what giving is. I mean, when you realize what Jesus has done for you, you want to return the favor in some way, and financially is one of those ways that I think humans really relate to. So we focus on teachings about thankfulness. We do highlight those stories as we go through about giving and the blessings God's given, but we don't have, there's not I haven't heard a tithing sermon in probably 3 years, truly. And I don't miss many sermons.
Yeah, same thing, we don't really do it specifically, but I think the testimony or the storytelling, and it happens on all different levels. So if in a small group setting, for example, if somebody tells, somebody who may be a new Christian in that, or a new attendee in that setting, somebody else might share with them about situations they've had. In cases where people come for benevolence help, because they need financial help for their family, sometimes in addition to just giving them money, we'll hook them up with somebody that can actually help them do a budget and that kind of thing too. And sometimes teaching them how to give is part of that as well. And the message needs to be, when you give, whether it's tithing or whatever the regular giving you're doing, you're not going to necessarily get rich, but God's going to always be there and be faithful and protect, and that's, I think, the ultimate message. And it works on all different levels. I have a friend who's a businessman who has literally given millions of dollars, to charities, and he tells me, I can't afford to stop giving. This is this mode, and we've got this thing going, and I can't afford to stop. And to me, he's ministering to me, kind of, I'm humbled by that, thinking, okay, I got to get on the ball here, And so that kind of one-on-one communication or storytelling, I think, is almost more effective than the pastor or somebody saying, you need to give.
Yes, one of the themes of the conference that we attended in 10th was creating a congregation of generous people, and I think generosity is a fruit of spiritual growth, and somehow, I think that might be more, I don't know exactly how we do that, but anyway, any final thoughts from the panel?
I know Josh will have something to say, but one thing I did want to touch on, that coming out of the Methodist / then Catholic tradition and moving into this more evangelical world, one of the things that I think has been really impactful for me is the way that this church and others like it really work on other avenues of ministry, the small group ministry, the Sunday school ministry for adults. When I was a kid, you went to Sunday school until you graduated high school. And then you were a grown-up and you didn't have to be there till 10:30. You didn't have to come at 9:30 anymore. You got to sleep longer. So really to work on that, connecting people with the body of Christ, I think that really helps them like Jerry said, hear those stories about giving. And it's not preaching then. You know, it's a friend of mine. I'm part of a small group, 6 years now, I think. And to hear a friend in my small group say, yeah, you know, I need to remember to drop off that check because I'm buying 20 t-shirts for the youth kickoff for kids. You know, or just little comments people make. I think that's when the people who are the unchurched people, I think that's when they're going to hear it, and that's when they're going to receive the message better, is when it's coming from other people, from their peers. For some reason, it takes a long time for stuff to get from the pulpit down to the people. They just kind of have a filter, their guard is up. But helping them get connected with other believers, I think not only will their spiritual development, but I think it does encourage them to give, because then they're more invested in the body.
Anything else anybody want to say? Let me ask the audience one last time, are there any other questions that you all have? Any other comments the panel wants to make? We had a wonderful lunchtime conversation, and it just really made me realize the body of Christ, how huge and diverse it is. And we were all talking about, do you want to say something about that, either one of you? Yeah.
It's interesting because you're talking about what happens in one church may not be the best for another. I mean, God's the same, but people are different. And so one church's approach to teaching about tithing may not be right for another church. And I think it's important that it's kind of neat to be part of a community of believers of different traditions. And we realize that we're all working for the same God. And this is all about His purpose and not about a particular denomination or a bunch of people. When I was coming up here this morning, driving up Lakeshore Drive, at North Avenue Beach, I saw a big crowd of people out by the beach. And I thought, and then it dawned on me, I remember what it was. Moody Church is having their baptism today, the first baptism in Lake Michigan, and we're baptizing 50 people. And it just reminded me of how God is moving in the Episcopal Church, and the Moody Church, and the community churches, and Church of God, and all kinds of places. And it's just humbling to see that kind of thing going on. Thank you.
I think we'll just let that be the last word. So, and let's give our panel a great big thank you. Very generous group, very kind, talent, and treasure, all of them. So, and thank you all for being with us, and we're going to take a little break, then I think we come back into this room at 3 o'clock for the final plenary session with Terry, followed by evening prayer. So, thank you.